There has been 200 years' worth of articles, analysis, and opinions written about Beethoven's use of this sound to begin his Ninth Symphony. It is an interval, 2 notes, A and E, that are 5 notes apart. Therefore, it's known as a perfect fifth, and its acoustical properties are fascinating, and by no means a random choice by Beethoven to open this monumental work. The French horns sustain the 2 pitches, but the second violins and cello pulsate. And throughout the history of Western music, the perfect fifth has defined and grounded tonality and the harmonic resonance of the universe in the ancient Greek concept of music of the spheres, which we discussed in Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. And he knew all of this. The perfect fifth, the primitive elemental sound, for instance, of ancient Tibetan chant. And the harmonic properties of the fifth are at the center of medieval organum. The austere, drone-like quality of sacred chant. Or in the Baroque era, the association of the perfect fifth with the beauties of nature, of earth and its simple joys, especially in the music of Rameau. And when we consider Beethoven's fascination with the mystical qualities of Eastern religion and the cosmos, even life on other planets, as he recorded in his Tagebuch, his daily diary, it's easy to imagine how the profound connections between all of these things might have influenced his creative voice. And 110 years after Beethoven's Ninth, the Austrian composer Alban Berg would base his sensational and decadent opera Lulu on a stage drama entitled Die Erdgeist, the Earth Spirit, where the title character, amidst all of Berg's disorienting atonal harmonies, is still represented, her primitive, amoral state grounded in the perfect fifth. The very same A and E with which Beethoven's Ninth opens. And Alban Berg in the early 1930s knew all of this very well. So all of this, everything that is embodied within the perfect fifth, hovers over Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And listen to what begins to emerge from it. Fragments, tiny 2-note motifs. And we've seen how Beethoven uses such fragments as cosmic matter in the Fourth and Seventh Symphony, where these tiny elements coalesce and expand into motives and themes. And this vast expanse of the perfect fifth slowly gains in rhythmic activity, animating and clearly outlining the key of A, whether it's A major with a C sharp, or A minor with a C natural, we're not sure yet since there's no third anywhere in sight to complete the triad. But the music is clearly based in A. So let's follow its progress now to its point of arrival. harmonically vague opening imprints the tonality of A in our mind as the main or tonic key of the music, when in fact A here is really the dominant tonality, the polar harmony that must resolve to D, in this case a clear, emphatic D minor. And Beethoven, in his sketch for this titanic statement, said that it, quote, reminds us of our despair. And we all know how this symphony will ultimately end, with the chorus. That's what everybody remembers about it. But the grandeur and the power of the finale is absolutely balanced by this first movement, a stunning example of Beethoven, the great architect of music. And Beethoven had conceived and sketched this opening as early as 1816, around the time he considered writing a symphony based on ancient modes. This would not happen, but certainly the opening of the ninth grew out of the mystical sound of ancient plain chant. So before we get into the flow of the music, here is another important thing. Those tiny fragments, these are intervals known as the fourth and the fifth. If you start on A and you go up to E, as we've seen, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's a fifth. If you start on the same A and you go to the lower E, 1, 2, that's a fourth. It's just the way that the mathematics of the keyboard work out. So this basic interval now of the fifth can also be converted into a fourth. And they both fourth and fifths, represent nature sounds in music. The descending fourth, we know it very well from the Pastoral Symphony. And the descending fourth now becomes the basis of the Ninth Symphony's monumental first theme. And the theme is entirely in stark, powerful octaves that outline the D minor chord. There's no actual harmony until the final two chords of the phrase. And then this part of the theme will become very important as we go. Beethoven, as always, extracts smaller pieces of his themes for developmental purposes. So we will label these as X. That's X, just the 3 rapid descending notes. And then those 4 accented notes will be Y. And X and Y are often combined, like so. Then the 2 cadential chords, which continue to ascend, now in G minor. And the surge of the music hangs up for a moment on this long E-flat major chord, which is odd since we're in the key of D minor. So this E-flat major chord functions as one of those bizarre Neapolitan chords we've heard so often. And the E-flat chord now resolves with a downward scale and a martial rhythmic figure in trumpets and timpani, like so. Here is the downward scale. And these 2 elements, I will refer to them as the flowing and the martial, will become very prominent as we proceed. They're almost like opposite sides of the same musical coin, the flowing and the martial. So let's back up now to the monolithic main theme, and I will call out all of this as we listen. The main theme, with X and Y, and the cadence, now in G minor, and the long E-flat chord, descending and martial. With diminished chords and an unusual cadence. And we are now in the main key of D minor. And you heard the opening return. The ancient perfect fifth with the little fragments. It's all repeated, but now it's in the proper main key of D minor. So what we've heard up to this point seems almost like a preview, as if in some former time, in some former dimension, we were able to experience the main material in a primitive embryonic state that exists in another tonality. that now evolves into the fully formed predetermined key of D minor. That's the key that is listed as the main key of the symphony. Now, I'm only fishing around here to convey what I sense is happening here. It's so unusual, and it will happen again at the beginning of the finale in a major way. So our exposition proper in D minor proceeds as before, and it crescendos into the massive main theme, again in stark octaves with ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. But it's now in the key of B flat major. Here's X and Y, and we realize that B flat major will be something of a companion key to the main D minor. But now Beethoven takes his X motive, still all in octaves, with no harmony, and he spins it out, leading to a powerful passage using the flowing idea, but very rugged and impassioned. Here is the entire passage, the big B-flat major statement of the main theme, and Beethoven's ingenious use of the X motive. And follow along, and you'll see where it leads. Surging, flowing motion has led us back to B flat major, to this gentle theme in the woodwinds. This is a transitional theme that some commentators cite as a preview of the famous Ode to Joy theme in the finale. And it could be related to the famous theme. Richard Wagner insisted that the Ode to Joy theme in the finale was written first and then worked into the other movements, the first three movements, in various guises. Others concur. And who am I to question Wagner? Anyway, this gentle transition leads to the secondary theme of this movement. And it becomes apparent that in this first movement sonata form, Beethoven uses B flat major as his substitute dominant key for the secondary theme, instead of A minor or something like it, which would be expected since we're in D minor. But Beethoven does things his way. He uses B flat, and D minor and B flat are very closely related, just one note difference, so the harmonic plan is tightly organized. Anyway, the secondary theme is this in the woodwinds. And this theme is built, once again, on the intervals of fourths and fifth. Here's a fourth, here's a fourth, here's another fourth, a descending fourth, and a fifth. And as an accompaniment, the strings play a delicate ascending figure, though it's not really that delicate since the double basses are also playing. Here now is the secondary theme. And now, something really unusual happens. Get ready for this. You know I've often referred to a theme or a group of themes. Often in a sonata or rondo, a theme might actually consist of 2 or 3 separate little themes that function as a unit. But here, for his secondary theme, Beethoven writes a total of 8 themes. The one we just heard, plus 7 additional mini transitional themes that are linked together. And they are all characterized by either the flowing motion or the martial rhythm. So here are the magnificent 7 new transitional themes. First, there's a lovely flowing theme that descends with that odd accented phrasing, and underneath, the violas and celli are rising using the same rhythm. Here is transitional theme number 1, leading into the martial theme number 2. Did you hear what Beethoven did there? This second little theme is in B flat major, very martial. It's answered by a lovely lyrical woodwind phrase. Then it repeats, but the melody of the second measure here is lowered. Sounds like we're going into the minor key, but he hangs on to this note, and the key magically changes to B major. Even lovelier now in the strings, with ascending fourths in the violins, and below the martial rhythm in the low strings. And this leads to the strangest of all of these short themes. Number 3, the strings flowing in octaves in the most bizarre chromatic pattern that winds its way through the shadows with only the slightest indication of harmony in the woodwinds. This passage drifts almost a stream of consciousness. It's bizarre. And there, that was the 4th of the themes. He somehow got back into B flat major, but he's still musing on that minor major thing. Now the rhythmic activity increases, and the 5th transitional theme bursts out, rushing and surging in the violins, while below them, the rhythmic foundation is entirely out of kilter. Here is the lead-in to this 5th mini theme. And our 6th theme is another wild one. The woodwinds unleash what sounds like exuberant sounds of nature that are syncopated, like so. 1. But every 2 measures, the woodwinds are pulled back into line by a martial figure in the strings. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Flowing woodwinds, martial strings. And the 7th and final mini theme, where all of the woodwinds now line up vertically into a vigorous descending figure. Here are these 2 remarkable themes, number 6 and 7 combined. As you just heard, we finally arrived at the closing theme of the exposition in the surrogate dominant key of B flat major. And again, it's in bold, stark octaves and very martial. So here now is the entire secondary theme group. We will back up to the actual second theme, the one in fourths. and continue on to all 7 transitional themes as we hear Beethoven's genius expand into this astounding array of ideas, and I will call them out as they occur. Here's the secondary theme with ascending fourths. It repeats, slightly varied. And here is transitional theme number 1, descending. With that irregular rhythm. And the martial second theme. Dolce woodwinds. And it repeats, but it changes. Lovely B major, and fourths in the violins. The martial rhythm is in the lower strings, and the mysterious theme number 3. And here's number 4, gently flowing. The first note is lowered, now it's raised. Continues to alternate. The motion increases. And the 5th theme. And number 6. Florid woodwinds and martial strings. Now it all lines up for theme 7. And the martial closing theme in octaves. And we sink back a half step lower. And the primal sound of the perfect fifth returns, and the development section now begins. And when you step back and consider the entire Ninth Symphony and its very familiar finale, you begin to appreciate the importance, the monumental power, and the function of this great first movement, which tends to get lost in the shuffle, I think, partly due to its austere, foreboding nature. And when we arrive at the central development section now, the sense of a vast, remote dimension is unmistakable, calm, ethereal, anchored once again in the ancient, inscrutable mystery of the perfect fifth. And you'll hear just how long Beethoven sustains and suspends the motion of the music as it shifts from the A tonality into D, the tonic. But now it's D major, a new, sunnier realm perhaps, with a flicker of the descending fourths and fifths. And gradually you will hear the music animate. The descending fragments in the violins begin to assume the shape of the main theme, now in G minor, and rather shadowy, that builds to a climax. And there's the closing theme from the Exposition, the martial motive now made up of diminished seventh harmonies. And we now hear an important new theme in this development that's not really new since it's based on the X motive. Just the three notes of X, very important, which Beethoven now spins into this in the woodwinds. And this final X figure, bum, 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 becomes very important. Beethoven indicates that it slows down. It loses its tension. It sounds kind of weary, especially with these diminished harmonies that follow it. And there's something very unique about this phrase, the hesitation followed by the music becomes listless, almost remote, every time this appears. Here it is, and the main theme, still in G minor, resumes, shadowy and stealthy. Again, the martial closing theme, and this new phrase, which again drifts off, it hesitates. It's very odd the way it continually pulls us away from the drama. And now we've arrived at the major episode in the development section, written as a fugue. Beethoven now writes a powerful fugal episode, which I believe calls for a brief historical sidebar. You'll recall that the new enlightened classical era of the late 18th century emphatically rejected Baroque music as too cerebral and technical and too dense, and the vogue was now for lighter, more diversionary fare. And this was the musical environment in which Beethoven grew and developed. Complex contrapuntal music was okay for academic study and for liturgical music, but that was it. So Bach and Handel were essentially out and largely forgotten. In fact, the philosopher Rousseau, whom I've quoted several times, had this to say about Baroque music. Ready? Quote, "With regard to counterfugues, double fugues, inverted fugues, ground basses, and other difficult sillinesses that our ear cannot abide and which reason cannot justify, these are obviously remnants of barbarism and bad taste that persist like the portals of our Gothic cathedrals to the shame of those who had the endurance to build them." Unquote. Nice guy, huh? And he proposed a kinder, gentler, innocent society. Right, okay. But Beethoven continually searched for ways to expand his musical outlook, to go beyond the limits of the classical enlightened style. And others shared this view. In fact, the great composer Franz Schubert wrote, quote, "O imagination, remain with us, so that we may be safeguarded from so-called enlightenment, that hideous skeleton without blood or flesh." Unquote. How remarkable, then, that Beethoven, like Haydn and Mozart before him, would seek inspiration from the past, the barbarism, as Rousseau called it, the lofty spiritual beauty of Bach and Handel, and their fugues. So here, in the central development section of the first movement of the ninth, Beethoven writes a triple fugue, not one, not two, but three themes going on simultaneously. First is the combination of our X and Y motives from the main theme, which now serves as the fugue's main theme, number one in the basses. The second subject, going at the same time, is X, but now it's extended in grand Baroque fashion in the second violins. And third, there are stark octaves up high, accenting the main theme on the offbeats, like so, 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2. And each statement of this triple combo is constructed like a standard fugue, using different keys and different phrase lengths. Here are a few of these statements, and I will call them out. Here is the first statement, all three themes in C minor. Now in G minor. Now in B flat major, with X as the upper voice. Now the full orchestra with X as the bass line. And the fugue continues. In fact, the rest of the development section is an extension of the fugue, and it has a detached, unyielding quality. It just keeps going, and at one point, the music dies down. And the Exposition's secondary theme returns, the one in ascending fourths. With the X motive now merging into the bass. Here is this passage, and you'll hear it repeated with the upper and lower voices exchanged. The triple-deck fugue resumes, light and delicate, but in a way feeling rather static, until it suddenly crescendos, it gains in force, and here's where it leads. Massive recapitulation, the return of the first theme, descending fourths and fifths. But now a mammoth D major chord that's sustained by all of the winds, brass, and thundering timpani. But let's pause again now for a moment, because there's been some controversy among musicologists about what we've just heard. They cite the structural and dramatic purpose of a development section is to build tension and momentum into the recapitulation, and that Beethoven has failed in a big way to do that here. True, there's a big crescendo right before we move into D major, but up to that point, Beethoven was engaged, they say, in, quote, genial busywork with his fugal writing, and that the music suffers, quote, a decrease in tension and hesitancy of expression, unquote. In other words, Beethoven has failed to deliver through an inexplicable weakness at this crucial point in his monolithic first movement. And I suppose I can see their point in a way. There's very little overt drama or momentum, but tension? I think there's plenty of subtle inward intensity and suspense. There's an almost sinister hovering in the music, which has overtones of a medieval danse macabre, leading us into some doom-laden realm. My reaction to these negative opinions is a step back and understand where Beethoven was during this period in his creative life. He was searching, exploring, and expanding his means of expression and how the textbook sonata form might be re-envisioned. So back off, guys. This is a new approach to what a development section might be. Beethoven takes the subtle, non-dramatic route, as if to say, I've already done it 8 times the standard way, and I blew away the competition every time. Now let me try something new. Remember, Beethoven, not the latter-day armchair critics, was in there wrestling with the gods. So the recapitulation is upon us, and this impassioned descending motive from the exposition, the one on the E-flat major chord, is now extended like so. And now the return of that lovely transitional theme. And the secondary theme now, with all 7 of those mini themes, now returns, but now in the tonic key of D minor or D major. And as before, the grandiose closing theme, all in octaves, again, very bold and decisive. In the tonic key of D minor. We are now in the coda to the first movement, and as we've often seen, Beethoven's codas are events unto themselves. And the first of those 7 short themes now reappears. Originally, it was rather comforting, as it seemed to hover and then sort of glide downward. But here, in the middle of the coda, it returns unexpectedly, and its effect is much different. Rather grim, almost eerie in the way it glides downward. But it leads now to a gentle pastoral episode, better late than never amidst all of this darkness. And it seems to look ahead to the sunny pastoral ode to joy of the finale. And it's based on the combo of the X and Y motifs from the main theme. And here, with the rustic French horn and oboe, Beethoven transforms these motives into a vision, perhaps, of what lies ahead, far ahead. But you heard how it drifted and became remote, even a bit sinister, with the woodwinds dancing around on the X motive, as we heard in the Fugue. While the strings softly, insistently repeat the Y motive. And when that descending, gliding theme returns again, we know that something is up. Things are not going to turn out as we thought they would in that pastoral section a minute ago, because Beethoven keeps pulling us back to our ultimate destination, our fate, as the movement nears its conclusion. And there, that motive that hesitates, the X motive, bum, 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 followed by the pensive chords. As this passage repeats one final time, the texture darkens, the life seems to go out of the music, and the flute, the last gentle sound that we will hear, 4 little whimpers, 4 isolated high notes, the last sign of resistance before we begin our descent. And a very distinguished critic actually cited this passage where the flutes seem to tremble and falter. As if they were the utterance of human lips, the organs of an oppressed human heart. Okay, that's fine. But then he goes on to say, that this passage, quote, almost suggests, without being disrespectful, that the great Beethoven was too much overpowered by his feelings to find adequate expression for them. Well, we'll see about that in just a minute. And this might sound melodramatic, but when I first learned this music at age 14, I was gripped by this passage now, the final coda to the first movement. It's grim, it's fatalistic, and incidentally, it's built on two new motives, one in the flowing mode, but very eerie, almost hypnotic. It repeats like a dirge in the bassoons and the low strings tremolo. An ostinato of doom that increases in power. The other new motive is in the martial character, but rather gentle. It's in the winds and brass. A summons, stately, ceremonial, with somber trills in the woodwinds that seem to draw us on inexorably with its mournful intensity, the timpani providing the funereal tread. In light of what we've just heard and where we are going, I think it's important to understand just a bit about Beethoven's life and the world around him at the time. Beethoven's emotional world was plagued by the ongoing legal battle for custody of his nephew Karl, and his letters and statements during this time are often extreme in their rancorous content. But as we've seen in the past, these real-life emotional challenges rarely affected his music. What was different now was the spirit of the times in Vienna. After the big 8-month party atmosphere of the Vienna Congress of 1815, Viennese society settled back into a much more repressive mode. Oddly, you'd think that the government would relax and expand its beneficent policies towards its people. But just as in the post-World War II Stalinist period in the Soviet Union, the opposite happened. This was definitely now the post-Enlightenment era in Vienna, with Austria reemerging as a major military power and a sharp increase in the level of political repression and official censorship. The glory days of the Napoleonic era, the sense of liberty and freedom of expression, were gone. The censorship became so bad that a playwright friend of Beethoven said, quote, "One must emigrate to North America in order to give his ideas free expression," unquote. Beethoven, of course, was affected by this. And this change in Viennese society also saw a great reduction in the number of wealthy aristocratic patrons and their private orchestras. Most of Beethoven's financial heavy hitters from the past either died, moved, or saw their wealth devalued. And so as Vienna settled back into the complacent, rather superficial existence for which it was known, Beethoven increasingly pondered his role as a creator. And as expected, musical tastes were also changing, with the light-hearted frivolity of Italian opera now being all the rage in Vienna, adding to the challenges that Beethoven was facing. And then there was his near-total deafness. So Beethoven became more isolated, and he turned his attention to a few large-scale works, the monumental Missa Solemnis, the culmination of his religious and spiritual ideals, and a major symphony, Beethoven had received a commission from the Philharmonic Society of London, where his old student Ferdinand Ries was a board member, and this proved the ideal opportunity to focus his energy and organize his many sketches into what would become his Ninth Symphony, even though the famous premiere would take place in Vienna, not London, on May 7, 1824.